Some would say that the financial situation the US government faces right now is severe. When you take a look at the US national debt, it's a whopping $34.8 trillion. But what does that actually mean? What's another trillion here when you already have almost 35 of them? Well, let's put it into context. When you look at the size of the national debt compared to the GDP of the United States, it's at the highest point it's been since the end of World War II. Or put another way, the US budget deficit is sitting at almost $1.8 trillion. Or put another way, the US budget deficit is $1.2 trillion so far this year, which is 3% higher than it was last year. In fact, the budget deficit gets worse every single year, despite the fact that US tax income continues to rise every single year. And if you're wondering whether $1.2 or $1.8 trillion for a budget deficit is a big deal, well, take a look at the amount of money the US government spends just on the interest on its debt. Well over $1 trillion, which means pretty much all of the money the US government is borrowing in excess of what it taxes, it's using that just to pay the interest portion on the debt. At this point, people wonder, well, we can just keep on kicking this can down the road forever, right? It's always been bad and it always will be. And that's true until you come to the end of the road. And that point where the road runs out is called a sovereign debt crisis. And I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like when a nation faces a sovereign debt crisis. And what you'll notice is that it looks oddly familiar and very similar to what you see by just looking around. If you don't know who I am, my name is Joe Brown. Back in 2019, I quit my job as a stockbroker to teach people how the economy works and how financial markets work so that you can use that knowledge to make more money investing. And because the vast majority of investing returns have been solely due to the fact that the United States economy has done well over the past century, it's probably worth paying attention to. Now, there's a religion called MMT, Modern Monetary Theory. And just like any religion, they have priests. And those priests will tell you that a government's finances are completely different than an individual or a household's finances. They don't have to care about surpluses or deficits. In reality, there is no free lunch. There is no such thing as a magic money tree. There is no difference except for one. The only difference between a government's finances and yours is how it makes money, or I should actually say how a government takes its money. And so if we want to understand a sovereign debt crisis, in other words, government finances, we have to understand how it works in the free market first. In the absence of force, there is only one way for any individual to make money. I have to give you something that you want badly enough that you are willing to voluntarily give me money for it, or at least give me something that I want in exchange. Let's take, for example, a pair of shoes. A few weeks ago, I was looking at the shoes that I had and I realized one of the pairs of shoes that I had that used to be my nice pair of shoes that I'd wear with like a nice pair of jeans and a nice t-shirt, they were not nice anymore. They were older, they were dirty, they were a little bit worn out, and so I was looking for a new pair of shoes. Well, a few days later, I was at the gym and I noticed a guy wearing a pair of shoes that were just sick. They were clean, they were white, they had a little color pop on them. I loved them, so I went and asked him, hey, where'd you get those shoes? He told me they were really comfortable, he loved them, so I looked them up online. They were like $110. Now, based on recent inflation, that may or may not be a lot compared to other shoes. I haven't been in the shoe market in a while, but to me, $110 was a fantastic price. I would much rather have that pair of shoes than $110. Now, here's the key about this though. It's not that the shoes were objectively more valuable than the $110, or else it would have been the logical thing to do to buy all of them, to buy them out of stock so that I could get something that is objectively worth more and give away something that is objectively worth less. That was not the case. I wanted that one pair more than I wanted $110, but I did not want the second pair of them more than I wanted the second set of $110. I wanted that second $110 more than that second pair of shoes. So that's how value works. It's subjective and it is ordinal. It goes in order. I wanted one pair of shoes more than $110, not the second pair. So the shoe company made something that I wanted badly enough that I was willing to give up something that they wanted for that exchange. And that way, both of us profited. We are both now better off than we were before because I lost something, but I got something in exchange for it that I like even more. I'll give you another example. When you go to work, you clock in. Work 8 hours, you clock out. You do that every day, 5 days in a row. You work 40 hours a week. You are giving up something that you want less than what you are receiving in return. You are giving up time and you are getting money. You subjectively value that paycheck more than you value those hours that you are giving up. And if you didn't, you just wouldn't work that much. Again, it's not that those hours are objectively worth less than the money. If that was so, you would work every single hour available to you in exchange for the most in your paycheck. It's just the fact that those 40 hours are worth less to you than that paycheck, but not the hours that are available on the evenings or the weekends. And for some people, it is that way, and that's why they work more overtime. So I think you get the picture. In the free market, if the absence of force, the only way in order for any individual or company to receive purchasing power, to get money, is to give somebody something else that they want more. And when this exchange voluntarily happens, both parties are made it better off because both parties lose something they want less and both parties receive something they want more. It means society gets richer. Wealth is actually created. The only time this breaks down is when there is force, when there is no choice. Which brings us to how the government makes money, or I should say how the government takes money. Because for the government to receive purchasing power, they do not have to give you something that you want badly enough that you voluntarily give the government something in exchange for that. Instead, the government says, give me this amount of money from your paycheck, and if you don't, men with guns will come to your house and imprison you. And we call it a social contract. Year to date, the US government has taken $3.28 trillion from American citizens. And that is up 10% compared to the same period last year. And in fact, when we take a look at total government taxation, that is the trend year after year, decade after decade, century after century. Despite the fact that the US government always takes more of your money in taxes, they never spend less and they never spend the same. They always spend even more and blame you for being greedy, for wanting to keep more of what actually belongs to you. And this is why taxes are inherently unpopular. And at a certain point, if the government tries to take a higher percentage of your money in taxes, the actual tax revenue will fall because people will try and find loopholes or they'll just actually evade taxes altogether. People don't like voting for people who are going to take more money out of their pocket. This is why when you hear people talk about taxing the rich, what they always mean is taxing people who have more money than they do. Because apparently decamillionaires, like every single person in Congress, is not considered rich. And so at a certain point, after taxing the population to death, a government will still need more money because the spending the government does also goes up every single year at a faster pace than they tax. But they can't just tax more, otherwise people stop paying their taxes, so they start to borrow. The amount a government borrows every year is called a budget deficit, and this is the difference between what a government takes in taxes and what it spends. Just like you, if you make 100 grand, but you spend 120 grand, the deficit there is going to be 20 grand. And if you didn't have any prior savings, you're going to have to borrow that. And for the US government, it is no different. And this deficit you can see gets worse and worse every single year to the point where multiple trillions of dollars is no big deal anymore, where in prior decades, even saying the word trillion would have received gasps. But there is a problem with this as well. And it's the fact that eventually you run out of money to borrow. This is one of the reasons why yields on US Treasuries have been increasing and why an almost 40-year downtrend in yields has now broken to the upside, because everybody who has dollars to lend has to choose what to do with it. And if you have fewer dollars available, you are going to require a higher interest rate to attract you to lend those dollars. So the more and more a government has to borrow, the higher and higher interest rate it's going to have to pay to attract dollars to borrow. And eventually you get to a place where a government tries to borrow and there simply are not enough dollars in the system for them to borrow from. Now, this sounds like a crazy thing, but it's actually happened many times. It's what led to the repo market madness in September of 2019. This is what leads to bad auctions or auctions that are close to failure, and that has been happening more and more often over the last year, where the US government tries to borrow at one interest rate, there's not enough lenders, so they end up having to pay a much higher rate. And every single time a government gets to this point, they have a choice. We can spend less, which means borrow less, or we can keep on spending the exact same amount and eventually default, or we can call on our central bank to print for us. And this is the third way that a government can gain purchasing power. It's by tapping the power of the money printer. Now, to be clear, most governments do not have direct control over their central banks. Just like in the United States, the central bank is technically and legally separated from the government. In nations where those are fused together and the central government has direct power over the central bank, you usually have massive episodes of hyperinflation, like in Zimbabwe and Venezuela and Turkey and Lebanon and pretty much every example of hyperinflation. But just because there are legal loopholes to jump through does not mean that the end result of a central bank like the Federal Reserve printing money, that money still ends up in the hands of the central government. Yes, it has to go through the banking system, but the end result is close to the same. When a central bank like the Federal Reserve does this printing, it increases the size of their balance sheet. Looking at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, we saw this happen in 2008, big pop in 12 and 13, and the biggest increase in 2020 and 2021. The only problem is, if they print just a little bit too much, the inflation genie can get out of the bottle. And that's exactly what happened this time. You had more money enter the economy chasing the same amount of goods and services. Just like more money in an auction chasing one good or service drives the price up, more money in an economy chasing all goods and services will chase the price up. So to recap, a government first will tax in order to take income. When, due to political unpopularity, they run out of the tax road, but they still want to spend more, they decide to borrow. And at a certain point, they have borrowed as much money from the economy as they can as well, but they still want to spend more. So they go to the money printer and say, just print some money for us. And when they run out of that road, inflation gets out of control. Now they've tapped out taxes, they've tapped out borrowing, and they've tapped out the money printer. What will they do next? At this point, a government faces a sovereign debt crisis. A nation's debt to GDP ratio will be at 120% or higher, which means they have a lot of debt compared to the size of the economy, which means they cannot tax the economy enough to meaningfully pay down the debt. The nation will also see most of its borrowing going to just keeping its existing debt pile alive. In this case, the interest payments on the national debt, well over $1 trillion, are getting very close to the size of the annual deficit at $1.8 trillion. To put this into the perspective of an individual's household, this would be like you using a credit card in order to pay the interest on your other credit card. Just the minimum payment, just the interest, not touching the principal. But since you're using a credit card to do that, you're actually growing your total pile of debt just to keep your debt alive. And because you've tapped the central bank, aka the money printer, to pay your bills, prices started to skyrocket as a result of more money chasing the same goods and services. At this point, taxing more has major consequences, which could be not receiving as much in taxes because people just stop paying. Borrowing also has severe consequences because you try and borrow more, you might actually default or have a failed auction. Number 3, printing has major consequences because inflation might just skyrocket out of control, which means a government has 4 choices and only 4 ways out of this mess. And it's important to know that none of these 4 mean no pain. They actually all have pain in different ways. Option number 1 is just getting your finances in control. It's what every individual has to do. Most people at some point in their life, hopefully early on, learn they have to do this. You have to spend less than you make, which sounds preposterous for a government to do this, especially a government like the United States, who spends way more than they take in taxes every single year. But consider the fact that in 2023, the government took $4.5 trillion in taxes, 2022 was $4.8 trillion, and 2021 was $4.3 trillion. That's a lot of money in taxes, and we don't have to go back that long ago to find a budget that would fit that tax income. In fact, the US government would simply need to return to the exact same spending that was already crazy high that they had back in 2018. If we simply return to the same spending plan as 2018 or any year prior, then $4.5 trillion would be plenty to cover all government expenses. You simply have to go back to the spending that it was before COVID. Would that be painful? Sure. Is it doable? Absolutely. But we all know they're not going to do this, so let's go to option number 2, see what option number 2 is. Option number 2 is the government just keeps their head buried in the sand and they just say, we're going to keep on spending more and we're not going to tap the money printer. We're just going to keep on borrowing more. Eventually, we'll default. We'll get to a point where we try and borrow money and we try and tax and we don't have enough dollars to actually pay the bills, and we don't pay the bills. We default. Now, there would be a few major consequences of this. Number 1, the US Treasury would fall off a cliff, which means yields would skyrocket. 20%, 30%, 40%, who knows? The US Treasury overnight would no longer be the financial bedrock of the global financial system. It would no longer be the reserve asset. Everybody would dump it because the only reason why it is still being used as that global reserve asset is because everybody knows at the end of the day, the US government will pay. So if that changes, you definitely don't want something that pays you less than the rate of inflation anymore. People working for the US government would no longer get paid. Companies that are getting contracts from the government might no longer get paid. There'd be a whole ton of stuff the US government was paying for. They'd no longer be able to pay those bills. Everybody would leave that fake workforce and that entire financial ecosystem would collapse. Very painful short term for some people. Long term, very, very healthy. Because let's be honest, the only thing they've been paying back so far is dollar terms, correct? But in purchasing power terms, it is less than what was borrowed. So them defaulting would be just a more honest way out. But let's be honest with this as well. There's no way they're going to default because in reality, they would have to choose to do that. And choosing to do that would result in them having much less power than they have right now. And so if it comes down between maintaining current power or growing current power and just choosing to give that up, they're probably not going to choose to give it up. So what is option number 3? Option number 3 is calling on the money printer yet again. This is what they've always done in the past and what they'll likely do in the future. When we look at the end of World War II, when the US debt to GDP ratio was over 120% and how it went down from there, a lot of that was due to yield curve control, the Federal Reserve stepping in, capping yields on US treasuries, basically printing the money necessary for the government to borrow any amount necessary they needed in order to pay the bills. This is what the Fed has been doing all along, and they're likely to do it again. The problem this time is the rate of inflation. And given the fact that since the 70s, that one of the Federal Reserve's main jobs has been to make sure that prices are stable, means that if it comes down to choosing between to maintaining the government's financial strength, making sure they don't default, and making sure that prices stay stable, who knows? Maybe the Fed decides to choose prices. Because right now, if the Federal Reserve were to start printing money, handing that over to the government so the government could spend that instead of having to borrow at higher rates, that would drive prices up higher. The Fed right now may choose to not do that. In that case, what we will almost certainly see is a complete rewriting of the Federal Reserve Act, where the government, Congress, tells the Federal Reserve, you have a new job. You no longer are supposed to care about stable prices, maximum employment, anything like that. Your only job is to make sure the government doesn't default. Monetize as much debt as necessary. Either that, or we'll just see a full-blown folding of the Fed underneath the Treasury and taking control of the money printer for themselves. I think this option is most likely, but there is a fourth option that we will probably see at least a little bit of as well, which is an explosion in productivity. Because so far, the only part of the equation that I have focused on in this video is the monetary side of things. It's the money supply. And all of those are true as long as you understand that in economics, you're usually saying ceteris paribus, which means all else being equal. So yeah, if you double the money supply, all else being equal, prices are going to go up. But what happens if you double the money supply, but at the same time, you quadruple the housing supply? Well, then maybe prices don't go up. Maybe prices actually go down. What happens if you double the energy supply? Well, the cost of energy dumps. What happens, hypothetically speaking, if you were able to, I don't know, triple or quadruple the workforce? And suddenly there were 4 times as many people, and let's say they demanded very, very little in pay to do the exact same work. And let's say these people who came into the workforce, there's way more of them, they're demanding way less pay, and they can do the exact same work, or maybe they can do even better work, and maybe they can work 24 hours a day. And maybe they're not people at all, but they are AI-powered robots or software programs. The cost of labor drops significantly. Productivity shoots through the roof. Things that used to cost a lot to get done from an individual or company standpoint can now be done for very little cost or maybe even no cost, which means all the available resources can be redeployed into something that is far more valuable. Humanity gets more productive. We have more wealth. And in the case of something like that happening, any sort of a deleveraging, any sort of an increase in total tax dollars, any sort of trying to inflate the debt away, all of those can be done with less pain experienced by the individuals that are getting wealth taken away from them, because at the same time, they're having wealth increased for them by their own work, by the free market. And in fact, explosions in productivity in the past have already demonstrated that governments can get themselves out of a sticky situation and deleverage without the populations really noticing much of the pain. The explosion of technology and the internet, the industrial revolution, the agricultural revolution, these were all things that allowed deleveraging to occur without major pain of that deleveraging being felt by the majority of people. This would be the same thing as if you took on a bunch of debt in order to learn a skill that made you quadruple your income. That allows you to deleverage from that debt without experiencing the pain of that deleveraging, because as a result, you were able to increase your income so much that that pain was no longer felt. It still occurred, but the position you're in now with so much more income is so much better that you don't feel the pain that you would if you would have had to deleverage without that extra income. Now, it's anybody's guess as to what will happen in the future. These are the only 4 options on how a government can try and resolve its sovereign debt crisis. And you know that I am leaning more on the likelihood of the printing route plus the increase in productivity, but nothing in the future is set in stone. That's why it's important to, number 1, pay attention to what is actually happening, and number 2, learn the mechanics of how the economy works. That way you can be better prepared to take advantage of whatever actually happens. And if you'd like me to help you get your portfolio prepared, I have just launched a brand new, completely free newsletter. I'm calling it Letters from a Heretic. It's the only place where I'm going to do much deeper dives on financial topics like this and much more. We're going to be talking about ideas that I seriously doubt you're going to hear anywhere else. I'm starting it out with a series I'm calling the 5 most dangerous ideas in America. These are ideas that are so powerful and potentially devastating that they could soon reshape the economic landscape of America. So if you're interested in receiving that and having me walk you through more complex financial topics, allowing you to make better decisions about your investing, to protect and grow your wealth during times of crisis, sign up with the link in the description below. Just submit your email and I'll start showing you everything I know. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
Section 1. Introduction. The essence of trusts. Trusts are a fundamental concept in the legal world. They serve as a mechanism for managing property and assets. At its core, a trust involves 3 key elements: ownership, control, and benefit. These elements must be separate for a trust to be valid. The person who creates the trust, known as the settlor, transfers ownership of assets to a trustee. The trustee then manages these assets for the benefit of designated beneficiaries. This separation is crucial. It distinguishes trusts from other legal arrangements. Without it, the trust may not be recognized as such by the law. The trustee holds legal title to the assets. However, they must manage these assets according to the trust's terms. They cannot use the assets for their own benefit. The beneficiaries, on the other hand, have the right to benefit from the trust, but they do not have direct control over the assets. Trusts can be used for estate planning, asset protection, and charitable giving. They offer flexibility and tax advantages. Section 2. Sham trusts, when illusion masks reality. A sham trust is a legal facade. It appears to be a trust but lacks the essential elements of one. The term sham implies deception or pretense. In a sham trust, the separation between ownership, control, and benefit is illusory. The settlor often retains too much control over the assets. This undermines the very nature of a trust.
Let's consider a simple example. Imagine a homeowner, John, who claims to put his house in a trust. He names his friend as the trustee and his children as beneficiaries. However, John continues to live in the house. He makes all decisions about its use and maintenance. He even sells it without consulting the trustee. In this case, John's trust is likely a sham. He has not truly relinquished control of the asset.
Sham trusts often arise in attempts to avoid creditors or tax obligations. The settlor may try to shield assets from legal claims. Section 3. Midland Bank v. Wyatt, a legal landmark. The case of Midland Bank v. Wyatt is a cornerstone in understanding sham trusts. This 1995 English court decision provides crucial insights. Mr. Wyatt created a trust for his children, naming his wife as trustee. The arrangement raised suspicions due to Mr. Wyatt's debts with Midland Bank. The bank challenged the trust, arguing it was a sham.
The court noted Mr. Wyatt treated the trust property as his own. His wife did not act independently as trustee.
The court ruled in favor of Midland Bank, declaring the trust a sham. This decision established clear criteria for identifying sham trusts.
This case serves as a warning.
Section 4. Trusts versus contracts, similarities and differences. Trusts and contracts share some similarities. Both are legal arrangements that involve multiple parties. They both create obligations and rights. However, their fundamental nature and operation differ significantly. Understanding these differences is crucial. It helps in choosing the right legal structure for specific needs.
Contracts are agreements between parties. They create mutual obligations. Each party agrees to do something in exchange for something else. Trusts, on the other hand, involve a transfer of property. The trustee holds this property for the benefit of others. In a contract, the parties are typically on equal footing. In a trust, the trustee has a fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries. This duty is more stringent than contractual obligations.
The enforcement of trusts and contracts also differs. Contract breaches are typically resolved through damages. Trust violations may involve equitable remedies. These can include removing the trustee or recovering misused assets. Section 5. Choosing between trusts and contracts. The decision to use a trust or a contract depends on various factors. Each legal instrument serves different purposes. Understanding when to use each is crucial for effective legal planning.
Trusts are often preferred for long-term asset management. They are particularly useful in estate planning and wealth preservation. Contracts, on the other hand, are better suited for specific transactions or agreements.
Trusts offer several advantages in certain situations. They provide flexibility in managing assets over time. This is especially valuable for family wealth management. Trusts can also offer tax benefits and asset protection. They allow for the separation of legal ownership and beneficial interest. This can be crucial in scenarios involving minors or individuals with special needs. Trusts also provide privacy, as they generally don't require public registration.
Contracts are more appropriate for direct agreements between parties. They are ideal for business transactions and specific obligations. Contracts offer clarity in terms of rights and responsibilities.
Section 6. Personal representation, a close cousin to trusteeship. Personal representation shares similarities with trusteeship. Both involve managing assets for others. However, they operate in different contexts. Personal representatives handle estates of deceased individuals. Trustees manage assets in living trusts or other trust arrangements. Understanding these roles helps clarify when a trust-like arrangement is not actually a trust.
A personal representative, also known as an executor, is appointed in a will. They manage the deceased's estate during probate. Their role is temporary, lasting only until the estate is settled. Trustees, in contrast, can serve for extended periods. Their role continues as long as the trust exists.
Personal representatives have a fiduciary duty to the estate's beneficiaries. This is similar to a trustee's duty to trust beneficiaries. The scope of authority differs between these roles. Personal representatives have broad powers to settle the estate. They can sell assets, pay debts, and distribute property. Trustees' powers are defined by the trust document. Section 7. Limited liability companies, an alternative structure. LLCs offer an alternative to trusts. They provide a different structure for managing assets and business.
LLCs combine elements of corporations and partnerships. They offer liability protection and flexible management.
LLCs are formed by filing articles of organization with the state. They require an operating agreement.
LLCs have members who own the company. Members can manage the LLC or appoint managers.
One key advantage is liability protection. LLCs offer protection with direct ownership and control. Section 8. The importance of genuine separation. Genuine separation is the cornerstone of a valid trust. This separation involves three key elements: ownership, control, and benefit. Without this separation, a trust may be deemed a sham.
Understanding the importance of genuine separation is crucial. It helps in creating valid trusts and recognizing when a trust is not truly a trust. The settlor must genuinely transfer ownership of assets to the trustee. This transfer must be more than just on paper. The settlor should not continue to treat the assets as their own.
The trustee must have real control over the trust assets. They should make independent decisions about managing these assets. The trustee's actions should align with the trust's terms and the beneficiary's interests.
Beneficiaries should have a genuine beneficial interest in the trust. They should not be mere puppets of the settlor. The trust should operate for their benefit, not as a facade for the settlor's continued control.
Courts look closely at how the trust operates in practice. Section 9. Real-world consequences of sham trusts. Sham trusts can have severe real-world consequences. These consequences affect not just the settlor, but also trustees and beneficiaries. Understanding these potential outcomes is crucial. It highlights the importance of creating and maintaining genuine trusts.
The repercussions of a trust being deemed a sham can be far-reaching and long-lasting. One major consequence is the loss of asset protection. If a trust is declared a sham, its assets may become vulnerable to creditors. This defeats one of the primary purposes of many trusts.
The settlor may find themselves personally liable for debts they thought were protected. This can lead to significant financial losses. It can also result in legal actions against the settlor and potentially the trustee.
Tax implications are another serious concern. Many trusts offer tax advantages. These benefits are lost if the trust is deemed a sham. The settlor may face back taxes, penalties, and interest. Section 10. Conclusion. Navigating the trust landscape. Navigating the complex landscape of trusts requires careful consideration. We've explored various aspects of when a trust may not be a trust. Understanding these nuances is crucial for anyone involved in trust creation or management. The key lies in maintaining genuine separation between ownership, control, and benefit. This separation is what distinguishes a valid trust from a sham. Sham trusts pose significant risks. They can lead to legal, financial, and reputational damage. The case of Midland Bank v. Wyatt serves as a stark reminder. It shows how courts scrutinize the substance of trust arrangements, not just their form. Creating a valid trust requires more than just paperwork. It demands a genuine intention to transfer assets and relinquish control. Comparing trusts with other legal structures is illuminating. Contracts, personal representation, and LLCs each serve different purposes.